Chapter 2. Shade. They called it an academy. The building was the first tower to rise after the rest had stopped falling. Homes were being restored, but lives were being lived there. Parents tended to their children wherever they were to be found, but the rest were expected to find their own places among the crowd. This collective strength was comforting, yet it was also intimidating. Those who were made out to be teachers based off the attention that was being given to them drew the crowd in as a man with a cane raised himself above the crowd. "Excuse me, everyone." The dull roar became a whisper as a common phrase rippled through the building. "Is that Ozpin?" Whether he heard this or not made no difference. He answered their first question and welcomed them with a sincerity that could be recognized by even the most callous ears. They needed no reminders of all that the Great War had done to their land, but they were given anyway. It seemed to serve a purpose, since he didn't look like one who wasted words. Havaliah stood in the crowd with the huntsman she met by the river. She didn't hold his hand or cling to his leg. She merely heard the man as he solidified the thoughts she had on the way. Her eyes were cold, as if the trauma she had seen all her life finally caught up with her. Words were listened to, but the phrases she heard beyond her own were all she needed. Huntsmen, huntresses, warriors, grim, peace, training. She finally brought her eyes to where she heard the man talking and caught him looking right at her. Her eyes darted down again in embarrassment, but it appeared to only be a coincidence since his speech didn't falter in any way. She kept her ears up and began to take in his words personally. He reminded her of the first huntsman she met. When she looked back at him, he was already gone. Standing behind this man, alongside 3 others, stood what this Ozpin called what they will soon be. He waved to the audience and left, accepting a canteen of water from one of the huntresses that stood by his side. She didn't hear a lot of what he had to say, but understood what she was here for. She let out one last breath and started following the crowd to where there were beds. Her ears darted forward and backward to catch up on whatever she had missed. Training begins tomorrow? I don't even have a weapon. Havaliah looked at the knife hanging out of her pocket and allowed the sensation of fear to pass as quickly as it came. The desert was a place where life and death were promised in equal measure. A better place to train warriors would be difficult to find. What made Havaliah curious was why they were voluntarily leaving a place that seemed to be the exception to that rule. The individual among Ozpin's companions that stayed behind made himself known and attempted to answer her question before she had a chance to voice it. "We appreciate you all being here today. The Great War is something that we would all like to forget. Unfortunately, reality does not give us that luxury. The reality is that we need to move on from it and return to confronting the enemy that we will always have, peacetime or not." With what seemed to be a sense of humor, he continued, "While the nations are taking the time to reload, we will not give the grim that chance." Some appreciated the morbid humor, while others remained where they currently were in time. A very broad-shouldered human signaled for the instructor. "Sir?" the boy shouted, raising one hand stoically. "Speak." His hand fell. "If we are out here to fight Grim, will we be given weapons to do this?" The teacher smiled. "I'm glad you asked that," slightly pausing with suggestion. "Daniel," the boy answered. "Daniel," he said with a smile. "If you haven't found a weapon already, you will be given the opportunity to now. There are plenty of metals and materials available for you, as well as test subjects to confirm their effectiveness out there. Your first task in joining this academy will be to find and effectively utilize your weapon in its simplest form. Then you will be given the resources to develop it further from there." Unease hung in the air as what awaited them fully set in. "What about those of us who didn't ask to be here?" Havaliah spoke, without raising her voice. Without a single gesture or tone that suggested rebuke, he answered, "Those of you who do not desire to be here will be allowed to leave. The city and school has plenty of room for those willing to help rebuild it. The offer is simply being presented to those who desire now to protect it. It is not going to be an easy task. If you have other priorities, then you have my full permission to pursue them." Stepping aside with a gesture to the city still being rebuilt, the instructor raised his hand out. If you're afraid, then you don't have to stay. If you have other priorities, you don't have to stay. If you have a family to find, you don't have to stay. If you don't want to be here, you don't have to stay. Then, with a smile, he concluded, But if you wish to stay, I know from experience you'll find something far more important. Holding the gesture for a moment longer, the refugees-turned-students began to make up their minds. A good number were students no more, and not a single look of hostility or pity was sent their way by the one who made the offer to leave. His eyes remained on Havaliah, and she remained where she stood. Afraid? The instructor asked those who remained. A wavering collection of no's replied until one bravely spoke the words, Yes. The instructor smiled and drew his weapon. At least you're honest. A whirlwind then rose from the sand and carried the students who remained farther into the desert, where their first test began.